Hello to everyone who's listening, wherever you may be. So as I was introduced, I'll give you a brief overview as to where we are with the big printed flexible electronics market, which is very broad. It covers many different technologies, but hopefully in the next 10 minutes, you'll get a current view as to the size of it, where it's going, and some of the opportunities that are arising from the current COVID-19 issues as well. So just firstly, one slide about IDTechEx. We are an independent market analyst firm, and we focus on looking at a range of emerging technologies. We've been looking at printed electronics for 20 years now, so we've got a lot of experience looking at the entire value chain, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's oversupplied, what's undersupplied. And in this presentation, hopefully I can give you a fairly detailed view as to where we think the opportunities are and what is really the current status of the market. So let's start off with the big picture first. In 2019, the entire market size, covering all of printed, flexible and organic electronics, as you can see here, was substantial. It was over $37 billion based on our definitions of the different technologies we include. The lion's share of that is in displays. That's mostly OLED displays on glass for now. There's many other displays in that. For example, a $500 million market includes the e-paper type displays. And of course, we also have printed displays and other flexible displays, including that from Ynvisible, which are emerging. They're small as yet as a market, but going into new sectors that existing displays aren't really tackling. We then also have billion-dollar segments for sensors, for conductive ink, and there's still many emerging and small sectors which are growing, and over the coming years, we expect to see these growing quite strongly in some cases. That includes sectors for flexible logic, flexible batteries, e-textiles, and so on. So as you can see from this single snapshot, it's really a very diverse industry. It's not just one type of technology, there's many different types of technologies, enabling materials, and they're all at different points of maturity and also market size. But I think one of the things that I'm really excited about the technology, and I think we see a lot of interest in this technology, is the new form factors which are enabled thanks to this huge toolkit now of components, all the enabling materials and the equipment as well. And that is changing the way we think of electronics, moving it away from rigid boxes of electronics we've all been accustomed to for the last 60 plus years, into enabling great invigoration of products and reinventing how humans and consumers engage with electronics by changing the shape of it. So moving away from rigid glass structures, things like displays, to flexible, foldable versions, stretchable versions in the form of things like e-textiles, and even embedding these electronics, whether it's plastic switches or displays, into 3D surfaces. So I think this is a huge opportunity to really invigorate products and come up with new concepts that weren't really feasible before. And I think part of the challenge and opportunity associated with all of this is that in many cases, we're not just replacing an existing component. The suppliers in the industry are having to create new products because those products weren't feasible before, and so they haven't been thought of before. And so they're developing products which consumers will find desirable and which they'll want. But from a market analyst point of view, it's quite challenging because those consumers don't yet know they want those products because they just don't exist. And so forecasting some of this is difficult, but it's something we've been doing for a long time now. We can certainly see the many different trends and opportunities coming through. It will result in large new markets being created completely from scratch. In-model electronics is one example of that. Markets for things like e-textiles, where e-textiles barely existed 5 years ago, moving to a multi-$100 million market in 2029. And if we look in particular at electrochromic displays, obviously that's the area that Ynvisible are focused in addition to providing complete systems. This is the IDTechEx view as to what the market size could be if we look at 2025. Again, another example of a market being created pretty much from scratch, because this is a new enabling technology which will go somewhere between sort of the high-end TV and cell phone type displays and also the huge volume, static printed graphics sector, tackling a fairly white space area where the types of display technologies haven't been available before. And it's not just about form factor, but also different applications see different needs in terms of power consumption, how these are made and integrated with driving components, and I think Ynvisible will be telling you a bit more about that as well. But overall, we see the market for electrochromic displays systems moving to about $80 million, that's US dollars, over the next 10 years to 2030. So I want to look now at some of the applications where a lot of this flexible electronics, including printed and flexible displays, we think will have an impact. And one area in the very short term, but also moving out to the long term, where we see strong traction is within the healthcare sector. You know, before COVID-19, there was an increasing trend to move to electronic skin patches, moving away from uncomfortable devices, such as those on the top left there, to devices which you could wear as a patch. And they would have the benefit not only of being more comfortable for the consumer, but also taking data points at a very frequent basis, and therefore really capturing and identifying the problems that that particular user was experiencing. And we see the opportunity for this continue to grow, and somewhat accelerated by the current COVID-19 crisis as well. So here's a few examples of a number of organizations working together. And here they've repurposed a flexible skin patch, which was initially being developed for those with heart failure and epilepsy to monitor them, but it's now been repurposed and it's monitoring those with respiration, also monitoring their heart rate and temperature, targeted towards coronavirus patients. And the problem this is fixing is, of course, we all hear of the issues of care homes and other facilities where the act of sending someone in to measure their temperature exposes them to risk of getting the virus. And so here with COVID-19, we see a strong use case for these types of skin patches to increasingly being used. And this already is now going through clinical trials. If there is another peak of this towards the end of the year, this could be used really to save lives and prevent the spread of virus by remotely monitoring the health status of patients. And indeed, if we look at the wearable technology sector, this is another area that IDTechEx looks at, and there's a lot of overlap between this and the flexible electronics sector. You know, as with a number of mature industries, particularly in the electronics business, sales in 2020, we think will be somewhere between the 2018 and 2019 level as a short-term blip. But despite that, we still see strong growth in skin patches. In fact, it's the only sector which continues to grow throughout this pandemic for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So moving from healthcare, another example of an exciting industry which is changing is retail. So if we look at the adoption of RFID in retail, then Jani-Mikael has already highlighted how Ynvisible has been involved. RFID is now a market of over 20 billion tags as of last year, and just over half of those are going into apparel tagging. And many retailers are now so sold on the benefits, they're looking to really accelerate this. I think with everything going on around COVID-19, I expect that in the medium term, we'll continue to see that acceleration. For example, in Japan a few years ago, they announced that by 2025, they expect to be tagging 100 billion items sold in supermarkets. That's eradicating barcodes, eradicating people on tills, so those people can do higher value things, and just automating the checkout process. And we're increasingly seeing now RFID being used within the supply chain to monitor these different items. And particularly as people, not able to go into retail stores easily, it's becoming increasingly important to have strong visibility and track and trace where everything is, improve supply chains. So RFID has been sold, and the business case has been sold very strongly in apparel, and it's now increasingly moving into other areas of logistics within retail. It's not just also about the logistics side. If we look at printed electronics in smart packaging, here consumer brands, are looking not just to improve their supply chain and know where everything is, but they actually want to increase sales. And printed electronics enables a mechanism to do that. Here you can see many different examples. Most of these have been commercial over the years, incorporating printed displays of one type or the other on packaging, which is used to really connect with the consumer and ultimately differentiate that product. It's the Procter & Gamble famous moment of truth, being that you do something that people look at your package and then you're halfway there to selling it to them. And so most recently, we've had Coca-Cola integrate OLED lighting onto their labels, which you can see here. And it's just a couple of weeks ago that IDTechEx held a virtual conference on printed electronics. We had someone from Coca-Cola present, and we had a record number of attendees. We had over 2,000 people register for the webinar. We've had many hundred more view it on demand. So I think it's an indicator as to the increasing level of interest we see in this sector. So moving on, we've looked at displays, we've looked at healthcare, retail, but there's also huge material opportunities going forward as well. If we look at the conductive ink market, that's just the value of the ink paste that's being used in a variety of industries. That's a $2.3 billion market in 2019, growing by about $1 billion over 10 years. And here the mature sectors such as silicon PV will continue to be a strong user of that. But like many other types of components, materials within print electronics, we see a lot of new sectors, a lot of new growth coming. For example, with 5G, there's an increasing need for better shielding for more components, and that's an area where this technology can add value, and even things like electric vehicles, for things like heat management. And others are coming up with completely different ideas. You've already heard a little bit about Circuit Scribe, who create pens with conductive inkings. You can draw circuits, much easier for a child to do that rather than even picking up a soldering iron or similar sort of breadboard and putting wires in. So it's just a dynamic and vast array of different opportunities, which also poses, I think, a problem to suppliers as to which to focus on. There's so many things this technology can tackle. There's also challenges to what do you start doing first. So if we look at the impact that COVID-19 is having on this sector, I think in some of the more mature areas, such as OLED displays on glass and in the PV sector, then yes, this is going to have, for sure, a short-term impact. And we see the sales of things like OLED displays on glass go back to sort of 2018 type levels. But it's also, on the other hand, for some of the more emerging components, creating more of a demand than we've seen before. Examples include some of the things I've mentioned already, such as remote patient monitoring, where there now is, a really strong need not to have close contact with patients, that monitor them from home. Other examples include automation and tracking technologies for increased online retail demand. That's RFID, but also RFID with sensors and, as needed, appropriate indicators. On the bottom left, you see a diagnostic sensor system. This is using print electronics. We're even seeing the materials, such as copper inks, being deployed as antibacterial surfaces, which are 3D printed, and others on the bottom right there, creating large area sensors to alert people if getting too close in a retail store with this traffic light system. So that whole map there has a printed pressure sensor beneath it. So all of these things are in use, and I think COVID-19, as tragic as it is, I think will create demand for these more innovative technologies in the short term, and I think really accelerate their adoption to some degree. So I'd like to finish off by addressing another point, moving beyond components, and more of a supply chain issue, and an issue which I think has been with the industry, at least since I've been looking at it, and it's been 20 years now, as I've mentioned. So some 8 years ago at IDTechEx, we looked at the thousands of suppliers in print electronics that we know quite well, and looked at what they do in the value chain. And you could see the figures here. At the time, around 60% were using all the different types of materials and equipment to make some type of component. About a third of the players were involved in material supply of some sort, and so on. But what we saw then is that there are very few who were integrating and developing products for end use. So many were trying to sell a flexible battery or sell another component like a transistor or an actuator or a solar cell, expecting that the phone would ring and there'd be a huge demand for this. But it doesn't necessarily, of course, turn out like that. And that's because in many cases, these are not just replacing what's there, and that can be quite hard to do if the incumbent technology is already mature and therefore fairly high performance at low cost. In many cases, these are doing new things that weren't feasible before. And so over the years since then, while I think they're still great on balance, that there's not enough integrators and people coming up with creative new products overall that are desirable, we have seen a number of companies within the industry, and here are just a few samples of those, decide to move through the value chain and become more than a component provider and fill this void. So examples include companies who've made flexible batteries for many years. They've struggled to sell that because a coin cell battery is cheaper. And so they have shown that actually there's a large market for things like flexible skin patches for temperature monitoring, where a coin cell battery would be uncomfortable for, and there people are willing to pay the slight extra amount of money for that increased comfort, and also it's easier to dispose of as well. And so companies have turned away from being a core component provider to being much more of a solution provider. And that does bring other challenges. You know, you might move from a B2B company to a B2C company, but these companies are showing they've got to prove and demonstrate and build the market themselves. And of course, some of the companies listed here are doing that in different ways with different components, but Ynvisible are also one of those companies doing that, taking electrochromic displays beyond just offering a display itself, but also looking at complete systems where they can be used. And showing different types of systems and selling demonstration kits, I think, is a good way for that to spark ideas as to how they can use these, different companies can use these technologies to create different products and therefore markets. So that was my overview. For more information about IDTechEx, we provide a lot of data behind this, covering many different sectors. So do take a look at our website, idtechex.com, and do contact us as well if you have any questions beyond the time we have in this webinar. So that's my part, and thanks very much for listening to that.